It's millions and millions of panels, right? And of course, you see that not only over the desert, also in the forests, right? It's everywhere in the world, okay? Now, when you look at these, they are claiming 160,000 households get electricity and this reduction of 2.4 million tons of CO2. This is actually not correct. It's impossible to power one single household with this. You need something else. Storage, backup, transmission, infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. This is not powering anything alone, right? And also the CO2 reduction is not correct because it's assuming zero CO2. You see, all of these CO2 claims is assuming that solar is zero CO2. It's not. It's marginally zero CO2 because an additional kilowatt hour has zero additional CO2. But actually, the total installation has a lot of CO2 component in it. And you don't only count the solar panel itself, you have to count the backup, the storage, the infrastructure, which also has a CO2 footprint, which nobody counts. Any of those government reports that you see are not counting that. So energy density is the first one, very important one. Energy density, fundamental issue. Same, by the way, with wind. Similar, different, but similar. Now, the next one is about the energy and raw material input. Because the energy density is so low, you need a lot of infrastructure to build up, to collect. The same way you have infrastructure to collect gas from the ground or oil from the ground or coal from the ground, because it's also free, it's just right there. Okay? The same way you have to have infrastructure to collect the sun or to collect the wind. And this has an energy footprint and a raw material footprint, right? This is an AI image of a silicon smelter. Right? And now, this is how silicon is made in China mostly with 2000 degrees, 1500 degrees in silicon smelters. And this is a 99 point, it's what they call 11N silicon. This is 11 nines. That's how pure the silicon is. In order to get this purity of silicon, not only for solar panels, also for computer chips and also many other things, you need to disperse a lot of energy and a lot of raw materials. And doing all this, you have a lot of waste. You have energy waste, and you have raw material waste. Energy waste, as we know, is what? Is energy ever wasted? It's never wasted. But what happens with the waste energy? It warms our biosphere, right? My phone is right there. It's quite warm. I don't know how yours is, but mine is hot. Yeah. So this is wasted energy, right? It warms this room. So whenever you are inefficient in your energy use, you're warming the biosphere. It's a fact. So we also understand that this is all done in China. Right? China controls 80–90% of the supply chain for all solar panels, for all polysilicon production, everything. Okay? For a large portion of the world. So the energy raw material impact is the second most important one. By the way, the IEA says and admits that clean energy, the quote clean system requires more mineral resources than an energy system based on fossil fuels. So how can you call something clean and actually requires more raw materials? I don't understand that. How do you define clean? It appears that we're defining clean by CO2. Which in itself is kind of funny because there's a few more things that are considering to be clean, shouldn't it? Right? So this is the chemical formula: silicon oxide plus carbon makes silicon plus CO2 in the end, right? And that requires, of course, high purity quartz, carbon, and we'll talk about it, and of course that makes it the polysilicon, right? So we have coal and pet coke that goes into solar. Primarily, you have hardwood. Amazon had hardwood as well, right? That goes into these large smelting operations, a lot of heat, a lot of electricity, and you put in this high purity quartz, which is 99.95 silicon oxide %. That quartz is already a processed material. So it's not just sand. It's high quality, the highest quality sand, and then it's upgraded, energy intensive and raw material intensive process. Then that stuff goes into the smelter with all the energy. Then at some point, if you're lucky, right, a solar panel comes up, right? Which of course requires a few other things. It requires a bit of, aluminum, glass, copper, steel, cement, oil, gas, and about 400 chemicals. This is clean. It's obviously not. I'm not saying that coal or gas are clean. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the claim that wind and solar is clean is just simply incorrect. It cannot be. And it's not zero CO2 either. It cannot be. It's impossible. So the entire world is calculating in all of those reports that you're seeing in the press, they're counting wind is zero CO2 and solar is CO2, largely CO2. Some are claiming a certain small CO2 emission associated with solar installations, which is wrong. We're just writing a peer-reviewed paper on this right now, just using official paper with official data where you can see that even when the IPCC assumes, I think the IPCC assumes 40 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour or something for solar, even that number is wrong. Because they're not using Chinese installations. China's run on coal, nothing else. Literally every silicon smelter has its own coal-fired power station with it. Otherwise they couldn't run it. So, about myself just briefly, so after INSEAD I went to BCG for about 6 years, and then I joined a family business called HMS, where we trade globally commodities, primarily coal, cement products and ore products. So I'm hugely biased, don't believe anything I say, check everything I say, okay? But in fact, I am negatively biased financially, because you have to understand our business is running better. The more wind and solar you put up, the higher the power price will be, and the more volatile the market will be. And we love that. We love high prices, we love volatility. So in fact, I am financially benefiting, despite the fact that I'm dealing with coal, which is about 36% of global power. It's 8 hours every day comes from coal. So I'm contributing to that. And I'm being pushed into the corner for that. Right? Nobody says thank you. I don't need to thank you, it's okay. But it's funny how the world works, right? So when I'm writing on LinkedIn and I see people, like dismissing me personally, it's like, oh, he has no idea. He comes from this fossil fuel industry, which I don't come actually. But it doesn't matter, he comes from the industry, because what does he know? But the world, the person who comes from wind and solar, he knows everything. And he's not biased, right? Except that I make my own money, he doesn't, because he cannot make his own money, because the money has to come from somewhere. Because when you understand what I'm saying, you will understand that wind and solar can never make honest money. I'll explain a bit more about that. So the third point is intermittency. We discussed the energy density, we discussed the energy and raw material input, now we talk about intermittency. This is Germany, installed capacity for the past 20 years. The Energiewende is 20 years old, roughly. And you can see beautifully how the fossil fuel capacity has actually stayed the same, completely the same, unchanged. Nuclear, we thought we don't need anymore, so we gave it away. But now we put up, a bit of wind and solar. In fact, we have now, we used to have 150 gigawatt, now we have double, 230 gigawatt, even more, 240 now.
Recording in progress.
And you can see that basically we've built this ridiculous on top infrastructure, on top of the existing infrastructure. Okay? Now, what you also may not know, but the peak power demand is about 83 gigawatt in Germany, and you can see we're getting dangerously low. So the problem that Germany has is not necessarily the wind and solar itself, it's actually the point that we're cutting down reliable capacity. That's the problem. Adding just adds to the cost, but the problem comes when the lights turn off, when industry doesn't have power anymore. And last winter, everything was fine, it was luckily warm. If it had been cold, we would have had scheduled blackouts, whatever you call them. And France is in a similar situation in a few years, for other reasons. So 230 gigawatt of installed capacity. Globally, we have 8,600 gigawatt. So you see how small Germany is, right? But this is the Energiewende. That's the poster child of the Energiewende. Now, Germany's power production has stayed the same in 20 years. So with this large infrastructure we built, we managed, this is 22 numbers, 33% of power from wind and solar. Okay? So these existing fossil fuel capacity gave me much less. So logically, I use my infrastructure less, right? Asset utilization, finance cost, economics, what happens to your costs when you use your assets less? Your cost goes up, right? So that alone gives you a cost increase. On top of the additional infrastructure you have to build and you have to maintain and throw away after 15 years or 20 years. So that's the power production. Germany's not growing. If Germany was growing, Germany would be in trouble. Now this is the primary energy. Wind and solar has 6%. So the Energiewende's success is 6% of total energy. That is a success after 20 years and about $1 trillion of investment. Taxpayers' money. That's a fact. It's pure data, nothing else. So intermittency. We're literally replacing one so-called dirty system with 5 so-called clean systems. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, we're putting up solar and wind, and we have to overbuild. It's not enough to have 1 megawatt versus 1 megawatt, right? We have to overbuild many times. So we're putting up an additional system, overbuilding that. Second, we need to have a short duration storage, like battery or something, to overcome those short intermittency issues, okay? Batteries will last me, if I'm lucky, 4-8 hours, if I had enough. If I had the entire German capacity on batteries, I would probably survive 4-8 hours. Right now, I survive a couple of minutes, okay? Then I still need a long duration storage, because what do I do when there's 3 days of no sun, 4 days of no sun, a week, or 2 weeks, or 3 weeks in the winter, and no wind? What do? I need long duration storage. Not only do I need the actual infrastructure for the storage, I also need to charge the infrastructure. The overbuild becomes very high. Fourth, I need most likely, at least Germany is planning, a thermal power plant on backup, on standby, for really bad times. Right? Germany has gas-fired power stations that are running 2 days a year, already now. 2 days a year they're running. They're the reserve for the bad minutes. And then the fifth, I need infrastructure, transmission grid, smart systems. I need to get all this involved. So I'm literally building all this to replace one so-called dirty system. And this is all clean, of course. 0 CO2, everything perfect. Infrastructure and raw materials, no issue, right? You start to see the point. So this is the intermittency issue. Now here's Germany's installed capacity, wind and solar together. I added it together, wind and solar together, and you see how it continues going up from 110 gigawatts. Now it's 150 gigawatts, wind and solar together. German peak load, roughly 83 gigawatts. So already my installed capacity, wind and solar together, is double my peak power demand in Germany. Now, this is my minimum load, not the peak load, but the minimum load. So it's roughly 50%. So the load goes up and down between 40 to 80 gigawatts in Germany, similar to many countries. Okay. Now, this is the average. Sorry, it's the maximum 4-hour generation for wind and solar in a month. So what I've done here, just this recently, I downloaded all the data, and I took every month and I looked for the 4-hour period in that month with the highest wind and solar generation. So you can see that the highest wind and solar generation every month, there's at least one 4-hour period where it's higher than the minimum load. So that's what you hear in the press. We're now 100% renewable, 100% renewable, everything is done. By the way, I'm not discussing hydro or biomass. I'm nothing against hydro biomass because they're dispatchable mostly, so it's okay. And fully dispatchable mostly. Now, this is the peak load, and this is the maximum generation. So the peak load, so the max generation wind and solar in the worst hour of the month cannot capture the peak load. It cannot. In the best hour of the month, sorry. And this is the most important. That's the minimum generation in the month's 4-hour period. For the past 3 years, 0. Wind and solar for the worst 4-hour period in any month gives 0. It doesn't matter. You can do this 10, 20, 30, 100,000 times higher. It will still be 0. And that is why, by the way, every additional solar panel has less value than the previous solar panel. It's like CO2. Every ton of CO2 in the atmosphere can warm the atmosphere less. Logarithmically declines, right? And the same is true with solar panels or winds. The more you have, the less benefit they have, up to a point that they have 0 benefit at the margin. Should never say 0, but very little. So intermittency, right? Now, what's interesting is when you logically see the demand curve for power during a day, it's a sunny day now, wherever you are, and you think, okay, I just overbuilt my solar installation by 2 times. Everything is fine. I just use the additional electricity from the day and I use it at night. No problem. Well, not quite, because first of all, the best locations in the world, like in California, Arizona, South Africa, or like Australia, are the best locations in the world. They have a natural capacity factor of 25% on average. On average, 25%. That means over the year, a solar panel gives me 1/4 of the time electricity. That's roughly what it means. So you would now have to overbuild 4 times for the best location in the world. Germany, you have to overbuild 10 times. It's about 11, 10, 9% natural capacity factor. So now you have to overbuild 9 times. So just to give me electricity during the day to use at night, I have not yet counted any storage loss. I have not yet counted any 2 days period of no sun, right? So if I now put in storage, for batteries, maybe I lose 20%. For hydrogen, I use up to 80%. I lose up to 80% of energy. Losing goes into the biosphere, warms our biosphere. So now I lose 20 to 80%. So suddenly I have to overbuild 11 to 45 days, 45 times. And now I do 10 days storage, 10 days, 10 days. I have to overbuild 110 to 450 times. Of course, these are theoretical, but you get my point, this overbuild point, right? You have to overbuild so often, so much that you need to plaster the world, which has raw material and energy implications, also has environmental implications. Talk about that. So we talked about energy density, talked about energy raw material, and we talked about intermittency. Now we have the issue of lifetime, how long this stuff lasts, and the environmental impact. So modern solar panels from China last about 12 to 15 years. Old ones may last 20, 25 years if you're lucky. But they're reducing the thickness, the glass cover, they're optimizing for power consumption, so it's much less. So it doesn't matter how long you're in. Right now, the reports of the government count with 25 to 30 years on average. It's completely unrealistic. Yeah. So what happens is, of course, apart from the weather dependency, actually, apart from the intermittency, you also have the issue on extreme weather events that, these things fall apart very quickly. And the modern circular economy is that I am mining in Africa, I'm processing, upgrading, and manufacturing in China, I'm consuming in Germany or in the US, and I'm throwing it back into Africa. That's the circular economy. That's the modern circular economy. And we're very active in Africa. I see what's happening. I've been to Kenya. I've seen this stuff lying there. German trash. Same with EVs, by the way. Right? So, what now? What do we do? Well, before we ask what we do, first we have to what happens. What obviously happens is that this has a large cost implication, economics. What I just explained, which is pure fact, it's not about wishful thinking, it's not about being political about anything, has a cost implication. And the reason why Bloomberg is right in Germany's days as an industrial superpower are coming to an end, I don't know if I can agree with it, like there's definitely problems and definitely concerns, is because obviously this has a huge cost implication. So the so-called free and cheap solar and wind does what? It increases your cost, your total cost. And what happens when your total cost increases? Your industries become less competitive. They go somewhere else. The people can actually not afford it. They go somewhere else, if they can go somewhere else. There's a huge implication of a cost increase in energy. A huge one, right? So this is Germany's energy-intensive industries from 2015 down to 2024. So you've seen some recovery now, and as the energy prices have improved a little bit, they are doing a bit better. But you can see that Germany is on a downward trend. And it's primarily energy cost, not only. There's a few other things. So how can Asia try to copy this? Germany's not growing, Asia is growing. How do you do this growing this? I don't know. So now, talking about levelized cost of electricity, so you've heard whenever you see that wind and solar is cheap, like these 1.35 cents per kilowatt hour, what they're doing is they're calculating the cost of building the solar panel, the cost of running it, the maintenance operations, and the fuel, the sun, which is free. And that, when you put that together over the lifetime, it becomes very cheap. Of course, they assume a very long lifetime, which is wrong, right? They overestimate the lifetime, right? And they don't count anything of the other, no backup, no storage, no infrastructure, nothing, no cost, not counted. That is why it's cheap. But at country level, at total cost, full cost of electricity, it's the most expensive. And in fact, the more wind and solar you have, the more expensive it becomes. Economic fact. Pierre Young can explain it to you. There's nothing, this is pure economics. The implications for the people are clear. Energy poverty. And I'm not joking. This is Germany, the Bundesrechnungshof, that's the German official government auditor. Just in their March report from 24, said that German energy poverty, that today 1/4 of households are what they define as energy poverty. It used to be 15% 2 years ago. This is Germany, this is not Africa. Doesn't mean everybody is poor in Germany. I'm just saying that the poor people are getting poorer because of wind and solar. So what do you have to do? We have to invest into the future. This is what it used to look like. This is what power plants look like today. AI image, I know. But when you go to a modern thermal power station, gas, coal, doesn't matter. You can eat from the floor. It's energy dense. It's efficient, energy efficient, right? We have to invest in R&D to sustainably, long-term, reduce our fossil fuel dependence. Because obviously fossil fuels have a limited lifetime, or a limited, there's just so much in the ground. The last calculation for official numbers, we have 900 years of fossil fuels. 900 years we have left in the ground if we consume as we do today. That's on average roughly now. So we have no urgency here, at least from this point of view not. There's more than enough, but not forever. So we have to think of something for the future. And certainly nuclear, fusion, fission is part of that. There's more, we don't know, right? And until we have that solution, what do? We better invest in our existing infrastructure to clean it up. If we don't invest in our existing thermal, coal, gas, nuclear infrastructure, we have a problem. We have to build new ones. What are we doing? We're taking money away. That's smart. Doesn't seem smart to me, but maybe I'm wrong. This is the energy transition and power over the past 40 years. This is the global power generation worldwide. It's the transition. You see how beautifully we're transitioning away from coal and gas? I see zero transition. Do you see any? What I see is addition, right? What I see is, up there on the top, where is it? There. That's what I see, right? Wind and solar is adding, right? It giving me a little bit of extra electricity. At what? At a huge cost. We discussed about it. At a huge cost. So we're just adding additional power generation capacity at a huge cost to the people. But practically, there's no transition. Coal had another record year last year, 8.6 billion tons being produced and consumed. 8.6 billion tons. Currently, our existence depends on roughly 100 billion tons of raw materials we get from the ground and we grow. 100 billion tons we need every year to sustain ourselves. Out of that, almost 10% is coal. Okay, so what happens if we stop coal? We don't sit here anymore. We would not. We wouldn't. Because I wouldn't have a solar panel. Okay. So this is the China power generation. Beautiful transition, right? You can see how well they're transitioning away from coal. It's amazing, right? This is Germany's power generation. You can hardly see it. And this is the US power generation. These are actual facts. What you hear in the press is models with wrong assumptions. I can tell you, every one of those reports has wrong assumptions. Seriously wrong assumptions, not small wrong assumptions. So, the unpopular truth about so-called transition is energy density, energy raw materials, intermittency. This is why solar and wind are actually the most expensive. Plus you throw in the lifetime, they last very long, it's very short. That means you have to continuously rebuild them every few years. You throw them away. You build them. You try to recycle, it takes energy. No recyclable energy. Whatever you do, it takes energy, right? The implications are environmental impacts in the disposal, right? Energy poverty, and of course the costs go up. And there's little in the world happens without coal, as unfortunate as it sounds. So I think I've made you think a little bit. Let's discuss and please be tough on me. Ask questions and think of what could make sense. So if what I'm saying is correct, maybe it's wrong. If what I say is correct, the implications are fundamental. The implications are huge. Number one, the transition is not saving money, it's costing money, huge money. What happens when you need to spend more money? Your industrial life is impacted and your personal life is impacted. Who is impacted personally? You guys are fine. You guys are fine. You're here in school. It's the poor guys in Africa who have a problem. It's the poor guys in Germany who have a problem. And in Jakarta and wherever, in Dhaka and all those things. Those are the people who cannot afford it. So the so-called transition is not a transition to something good. Now you can just say, okay, what if we don't do it? Climate change will all kill us. Well, that's a whole separate discussion. We're not discussing climate change right now. Right now, I'm discussing immediate impact of changing our energy systems. Climate change impacts are in 2100 based on models which also have wrong assumptions. But that's a different story. It doesn't mean it's not happening. Of course it's happening. It's getting warmer. Not much here. It was warm now, but on average, the warming happens around the edges of the planet, not in the middle, on average. Anyways, let's think about this, because when you read in the press, when you see organizations, when you see universities, I mean, I have 4 children, they go to school, and when I listen what the school teaches to my children, none of this. The school that I'm also paying money for is putting solar panels up with my money. And what is happening? They're increasing the cost of electricity and reducing reliability. So I open up the floor. Thank you.